The feeling of being watched intensified as they worked through the night, copying terabytes of research data and fabrication protocols. Jessica found herself constantly checking the lab's entrances, her hand never far from her weapon. The station's empty corridors seemed to echo with sounds that shouldn't exist, footsteps with no feet, whispers in languages that predated human speech. "Got it," Sarah announced, ejecting a data crystal from one of the quantum processors. "Complete fabrication protocols for quantum entanglement chambers, including the exotic matter synthesis procedures." "How long to build one?" Jessica asked. "With proper equipment and materials? Maybe a week. Without?" Sarah shrugged. "Months. Maybe longer." They had been working for 6 hours when Zhang's voice crackled over their comm units. "We've got problems. I'm detecting FTL signatures on the edge of the system. Multiple contacts moving this way." Jessica felt her blood turn to ice. "Devourers? That's my guess. Their drive signatures match the profiles from the initial invasion. ETA approximately 8 hours. 8 hours to complete their mission and escape. It might be enough, if they worked fast and didn't encounter any complications. Marcus, take Victor and secure the portable fabrication units from Lab 7. Sarah, keep copying data. Priority on anything related to quantum field manipulation. Kowalski, you're with me. We're going to investigate the station's quantum research archives." The archives were located in the station's core section, protected by multiple security barriers and isolation fields. As they made their way deeper into the facility, the sense of wrongness that had been nagging at Jessica grew stronger. "Sir," Kowalski said quietly, "I'm picking up some unusual energy readings. Very faint, but definitely artificial." "What kind of readings?" "Quantum fluctuations. Like something is manipulating subspace in very small increments." He checked his instruments again. "It's coming from somewhere below us." Below them would be the station's experimental laboratories, where Europa's researchers had conducted their most classified projects. According to the facility maps, that section had been sealed since the evacuation. "Show me," Jessica said. They found a maintenance hatch that led to the lower levels, its security locks disabled by whoever had evacuated the station. The corridors below were darker than the main sections, lit only by emergency lighting that cast everything in red shadows. The energy readings led them to a laboratory that didn't appear on any of the official station maps. Inside, they found equipment unlike anything Jessica had seen before, crystalline structures that pulsed with familiar blue light, surrounded by monitoring devices and analysis equipment. "My God!" Kowalski breathed. They were studying the same technology. At the center of the lab stood an artifact identical to the one they had found beneath New Geneva. But this one was different somehow. Its light was dimmer, more erratic, and the air around it felt charged with unstable energy. "It's damaged," Jessica realized. "Or dying." A voice spoke from the shadows. "It's been dying for 3 months. Ever since the Devourers found us." Jessica spun, her weapon ready, to find a man emerging from behind the monitoring equipment. He was tall and thin, with the pale complexion of someone who spent most of his time underground. His clothes were disheveled, and his eyes held the particular intensity of someone who had been alone too long. "Dr. James Morrison," he said, raising his hands to show he was unarmed. "Former director of Europa Station's xenoarchaeology program. Currently the only person left alive on this rock." "What happened here?" Jessica asked, keeping her weapon trained on him. "The same thing that happened everywhere else. The Devourers came. But we were lucky, we had the artifact." Morrison gestured to the dying crystal. "It kept them away at first. We thought we were safe." "What changed?" Morrison's expression grew haunted. "We made contact. Dr. Vasquez, on Kepler 442. We compared notes, shared research data. For a brief moment, we thought we might actually have a chance." Jessica felt a chill that had nothing to do with the station's recycled air. "What do you mean, made contact?" "Quantum entanglement communication. We established a link between our artifact and hers. Instantaneous communication across interstellar distances. Morrison laughed bitterly. We thought we were being clever. We thought we were coordinating our research. But you were doing something else, Kowalski said, understanding dawning in his voice. We were creating a network, linking the artifacts together across space. Morrison turned to study the dying crystal. And that's when they noticed us. The implications hit Jessica like a physical blow. If the artifacts were connected, and if the Devourers could somehow trace those connections. Dr. Vasquez, she said urgently. Is she in danger? We all are. Morrison pulled up a display on one of his monitors, showing a three-dimensional map of the galaxy. Scattered across it were points of blue light, each one an artifact site that had been discovered over the past few years. There are 17 known artifacts scattered across what used to be Imperial space. We've been activating them, studying them, thinking we were preparing to fight back. The display zoomed in on the local region of space, showing connection lines between the artifacts. The pattern was unmistakable, a network spreading across the galaxy like a spider's web. But we've been playing into their hands, Morrison continued. The artifacts aren't weapons. They're beacons. Signals to call the Devourers home. That's impossible, Kowalski protested. We've seen them work. The Devourers avoid them. Only when they're dormant. Only when they're not connected to the network. Morrison manipulated the display, highlighting activity patterns. But once they're linked, once they're communicating with each other, they become something else entirely. They become a way for the Devourers to coordinate their attacks across interstellar distances. Jessica stared at the display, her mind reeling. Everything they had hoped for, everything they had planned, was based on a fundamental misunderstanding. They weren't fighting with ancient weapons, they were activating ancient traps. How do we stop it? She asked. You can't. Not from here. Morrison's fingers danced over his controls, bringing up new data streams. But there might be a way to turn it against them. The network works both ways. It allows coordination, but it also creates vulnerabilities. He showed them energy flow patterns between the artifacts, complex waveforms that pulsed across the quantum links. If you could synchronize all the artifacts simultaneously, create a resonance cascade across the entire network, the feedback might be enough to disrupt their coordination permanently. Maybe even damage them directly. And if it doesn't work? Morrison shrugged. Then we've just made it easier for them to find us. Jessica's comm unit crackled with Dang's voice. Boss, those contacts are accelerating. ETA is now 6 hours, and they're definitely Devourer ships. We need to move. 6 hours. Jessica looked around the lab, taking in the dying artifact and Morrison's research data. They had come here looking for tools to build weapons, but instead they had discovered that their greatest hope was actually a trap. Can you transfer your research to portable storage? She asked Morrison. Already done. He held up a data crystal similar to the one Sarah had been using. Everything I've learned about the network, the resonance patterns, the synchronization protocols. It's all here. Then we're leaving. All of us. I can't abandon the station, Morrison protested. The research will be meaningless if you're dead. Jessica's voice carried the unmistakable authority of command. You're coming with us, Doctor. That's an order. They gathered the rest of the team and made their way back to the Lucky Strike, carrying what equipment they could manage and leaving the rest behind. The station felt different now, not empty, but expectant, as if it were waiting for something to arrive. As they prepared for departure, Sarah monitoring communications while Zhang ran through her pre-flight checklist, Jessica found herself thinking about the network Morrison had shown her. 17 artifacts, scattered across Imperial space, all connected by quantum links that the Devourers could somehow use to coordinate their attacks. How long until we can jump? She asked Zhang. FTL drive is spooling up now. 2 minutes. Make it 1. On the main display, she could see the approaching Devourer fleet, dark shapes moving through space like a school of predatory fish. They were still hours away, but their very presence seemed to make the artifact on Europa react. Through the lab monitors, she watched its light grow brighter, more urgent. "Jump drive is ready," Zhang announced. "Do it." Reality twisted around them again, and they were back in the quantum foam between dimensions. But this time, Jessica could swear she felt something else in the void with them, a presence vast and hungry, watching them from the spaces between spaces. When they emerged back into normal space near Kepler 442, the first thing Sarah detected was an emergency transmission from their hidden base. "It's Marcus," she said, her face pale. "The Devourers have found Dr. Vasquez." The transmission was fragmentary, broken by interference and desperation. Marcus's voice crackled through the static. "Under attack, artifact is, coordinates are compromised, if anyone receives this." Then silence. "How long ago?" Jessica demanded. Sarah checked her timestamps. "Transmission originated 4 hours ago. But given our jump lag and the quantum distortion from the artifacts, it could have been sent any time in the past day." Jessica stared at the tactical display, seeing the orange blips that marked Devourer patrol routes. The patterns had changed since they left. The spiral formations Sarah had identified were tightening, converging on the coordinates of Dr. Vasquez's research facility. "They're using the network," Morrison said quietly. "The quantum link between the artifacts allows them to triangulate active sites. Once they detect one, they can coordinate fleet movements to converge on it." "Can we get to the facility?" Jessica asked Zhang. The pilot consulted her navigation charts. "The surface approach is impossible, too many Devourer patrols. But there might be another way." She highlighted a route that led through the industrial district. "The old mining tunnels. They connect to the same underground system we've been using. It would take hours to reach the facility through the tunnels, time they might not have. But it was their only option." "Take us down," Jessica ordered. "Emergency landing protocols. Get us as close to the tunnel entrance as possible." The Lucky Strike descended through Kepler 442's atmosphere like a falling star, its hull heating to dangerous levels as Jean pushed the ship beyond its safety margins. They landed in a crater that had once been a residential district, the ship's engines cooling with pings and groans of stressed metal. "She'll need at least 6 hours of maintenance before she's flight-ready again," John warned. "And that's assuming we can find replacement parts." "Then we better make this count," Jessica replied. They made their way through the ruins to the tunnel entrance, moving with the practiced efficiency of a team that had learned to survive in enemy territory. The underground passages were darker than Jessica remembered, and the air carried a new scent, something organic and wrong that reminded her of the patterns they had found on Europa Station. "Contact," Victor warned, his demolition sensors detecting movement ahead. "Multiple signatures, approaching from the direction of the research facility." They took cover behind a fallen support beam, weapons ready. The contacts emerged from the darkness, humans, but moving with the wrong kind of coordination. Their eyes reflected light like mirrors, and their skin had taken on a grayish pallor that spoke of corruption. "Infected," Morrison whispered. "The Devourers don't just consume physical matter. They can subvert biological systems, turn them into extensions of their network." The infected humans moved past their hiding spot without detecting them, but Jessica could see more coming behind them. The tunnels that had been their sanctuary were now compromised. "Alternate route," she decided. "We go through the commercial district." They backtracked and took a parallel tunnel that led toward the surface. The route was longer and more dangerous, but it might allow them to approach the facility from an unexpected direction. As they moved through the underground maze, Sarah's portable scanner picked up quantum fluctuations from the direction of the research facility. The readings were stronger than anything they had detected before, as if the artifact was operating at maximum power. "It's fighting back," Morrison interpreted. "The artifact is trying to resist whatever the Devourers are doing to it." They emerged from the tunnels into the basement of a collapsed office building. Through gaps in the rubble, Jessica could see the research facility in the distance, and the Devourer forces surrounding it. The aliens had brought more than scouts this time. Massive creatures that looked like walking buildings moved among smaller support units, their surfaces covered in the same organic cables that connected their technology. Energy weapons fired in carefully coordinated patterns, trying to break through some kind of barrier that surrounded the facility. The artifact's defense field, Morrison explained. It's protecting the research site, but the Devourers are overwhelming it through concentrated fire. Even as he spoke, they could see the barrier flickering, its blue radiance growing dim. It wouldn't hold much longer. We need to get inside, Jessica said. Sarah, can you find us a route that avoids the main assault forces? The communications specialist deployed her sensors, scanning for gaps in the Devourer formation. There's a maintenance tunnel that connects to the facility's rear entrance. It's covered by their perimeter forces, but if we time it right. She highlighted a route on her tablet, showing guard positions and patrol timings. It would require precise coordination and no small amount of luck. Victor, can you create a distraction? Jessica asked. The demolitions expert studied the enemy positions. I can bring down that overpass, block their main approach route. It won't stop them, but it might buy us a few minutes. Do it. Victor's charges detonated with a roar that shook the entire district. The overpass collapsed in a cascade of concrete and twisted metal, crushing several Devourer units and forcing the others to reorganize their approach. In the confusion, Jessica's team sprinted for the maintenance tunnel. They reached it just as the Devourers began to respond to the distraction, their formation shifting to compensate for the blocked route. The tunnel led directly into the research facility's lower levels, emerging in a storage room filled with scientific equipment. The building shook around them as Devourer weapons impacted the exterior, and the lights flickered with each hit. Dr. Vasquez! Jessica called as they moved through the corridors. Where are you? Here. The response came from the main laboratory, where they found Vasquez and the surviving members of their cell barricaded behind overturned tables and equipment racks. The blue artifact stood in the center of the room, its light now blazing with almost unbearable intensity. Thank God, Marcus said, emerging from cover. We've been trying to reach you for hours. The Devourers found us right after you left for Europa. The artifact started reacting, drawing them in like a beacon. Because it is a beacon, Morrison said, stepping forward. I'm Dr. James Morrison, Europa Station. I've been studying these artifacts for 3 years, and I have bad news. He quickly explained what they had learned about the network, the quantum links, and the true purpose of the artifacts. As he spoke, Vasquez's expression grew more and more horrified. We've been playing into their hands all along, she said when he finished. Every activation, every experiment, we've been making it easier for them to coordinate their attacks. The building shook again, more violently this time. Through the laboratory's reinforced windows, they could see Devourer assault units advancing through the rubble, their weapons charging for another bombardment. Can we shut it down? Jessica asked. Disconnect this artifact from the network? Not without destroying it, Vasquez replied. The quantum entanglement is built into its fundamental structure. We'd have to completely disrupt its crystalline matrix. Then maybe that's what we need to do, Sarah suggested. Shut down all of them. Break the network entirely. Morrison shook his head. Impossible. The artifacts are scattered across thousands of light years. We need to coordinate simultaneous shutdowns, and we don't have the resources or the time. Another impact, and this time they heard the sound of structural collapse from somewhere above them. The Devourers were breaking through the facility's defenses. There might be another way, Vasquez said slowly. Morrison, you said the network allows for resonance cascades. What if we could create a destabilization pattern instead of a shutdown? Something that would propagate through the quantum links and disrupt the entire system? Morrison's eyes widened as he understood. A resonance virus. A self-propagating quantum pattern that would spread from artifact to artifact, disrupting their ability to coordinate. He pulled out his portable computer, calling up network diagrams. It might work. But we need to initiate it from multiple points simultaneously to ensure propagation. How many points? Jessica asked. At least 3, preferably 5. And they need to be major network nodes, artifacts with strong quantum links to multiple other sites. Marcus consulted his intelligence files. We have contacts with resistance cells on Centauri Prime and Wolf 359. Both systems have active artifacts that the locals have been studying. That's only 3 points, Sarah pointed out. 4, John said from the doorway. There's an artifact on Vega Prime, in the ruins where they found this technology originally. I know someone there. The building shook again, and this time they heard the sound of Devourer units entering the upper levels. They were running out of time. Even if we can coordinate with the other sites, we still need a way to generate the destabilization pattern, Morrison said. The calculations alone would require the quantum processors from Europa Station, Kowalski interrupted. We brought the portable fabrication units. If we can set up a temporary quantum computer, it might work, Vasquez agreed. But we need at least an hour to assemble the components and run the calculations. An hour they didn't have. The sounds of combat were getting closer, and the artifact's defensive field was failing. Soon the Devourers would break through. Then we run, Jessica decided. Back to the ship, set up the quantum computer there, and coordinate with the other resistance cells from orbit. The Devourers will follow us, Marcus warned. The artifact will keep drawing them until we shut down the network. Then we better work fast. They gathered their equipment and data, preparing to abandon the facility that had been their sanctuary. As they moved toward the exit, Jessica took one last look at the blue artifact. For months, it had represented hope, a weapon against an implacable enemy. Now she knew it was something far more dangerous. But maybe, if they were very lucky and very clever, they could turn that danger against its creators. The sounds of destruction followed them as they fled through the tunnels, the artifact's light growing dim behind them as the Devourers finally broke through its defenses. In the distance, she could hear new sounds, the approach of more Devourer forces, drawn by the network's call. The real battle was just beginning. The Lucky Strike's cargo hold had been transformed into a makeshift laboratory, filled with quantum processors, fabrication units, and enough cables to wire a small city. Dr. Vasquez and Morrison worked side by side, their hands dancing over control interfaces as they assembled the most complex quantum computer ever built outside of a major research facility. Jessica watched from the bridge as Devourer ships converged on their position. John had taken them to the edge of the system, hiding in the shadow of a gas giant's moon, but the pursuing fleet was methodically searching every possible hiding spot. How much longer? She asked. The quantum matrix is stabilizing, Morrison reported. But we need at least 30 more minutes to complete the resonance calculations. Sarah, any word from the other resistance cells? Centauri Prime confirms they're in position. Wolf 359 is still trying to reach their artifact site. The Devourers have been hitting them hard. Sarah paused, listening to another transmission. Vega Prime, no contact for the past 6 hours. 3 sites, maybe 4 if Wolf 359 could get their people in position. It would have to be enough. Boss, John called from the pilot's seat. We've got incoming. 3 Devourer ships bearing directly for our position. They've found us. Jessica studied the tactical display. The enemy ships were moving in the characteristic spiral pattern they'd observed, but something was different about their formation. They seemed more coordinated, more purposeful. They're not just hunting randomly, she realized. They know exactly where we are. Morrison looked up from his calculations. The artifact fragments we're carrying. They're still connected to the network, still transmitting our location. The implications were staggering. Every piece of artifact technology they'd collected, every data crystal and component sample, was broadcasting their position to the enemy fleet. Can we shut them down? Jessica asked. Not without losing all our research data, Vasquez replied. The quantum entanglement is what makes the artifacts work. Disrupt that, and we lose everything. Then we finish this quickly. Jessica activated the ship's communication system. All resistance cells, this is Lieutenant Parker. Initiate the destabilization sequence in 15 minutes. Repeat, 15 minutes to network disruption. The responses came back quickly. Centauri Prime, acknowledged. Wolf 359. We're in position. ready to proceed. But from Vega Prime, only silence. 3 sites, Marcus said grimly. Will it be enough? Morrison's calculations scrolled across his display, probability matrices and quantum field equations that hurt to look at directly. Maybe. The propagation pattern will be weaker, but if we can coordinate the timing precisely. The Lucky Strike shuddered as the first Devourer weapons found their range. John threw the ship into evasive maneuvers, weaving between asteroid fragments and sensor shadows, but the enemy was gaining. 10 minutes, Vasquez announced. The resonance pattern is ready for transmission. Sarah, open channels to all resistance cells. Full encryption, maximum bandwidth. Channels open. Jessica took a deep breath. In her years of military service, she had commanded Marines in battle, led boarding actions against pirate vessels, and coordinated fleet movements across multiple star systems. But nothing had prepared her for this, the weight of an entire species' survival resting on a single, desperate gamble. All resistance cells, this is Lieutenant Parker. You have the destabilization pattern. Initiate on my mark in 60 seconds. The Lucky Strike lurched as another enemy weapon found its mark. Warning lights flashed across the bridge, and she could smell the acrid scent of burning electronics. Hull breach in Section C, Zhang reported. Emergency force fields are holding, but we can't take much more of this. 50 seconds, Jessica announced. Through the bridge windows, she could see the Devourer ships closing in, dark shapes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Their weapons fired in coordinated patterns, and she could see smaller attack craft deploying from their hulls. 40 seconds. Morrison and Vasquez worked frantically at their jury-rigged quantum computer, fine-tuning the resonance pattern and checking synchronization with the other sites. The calculations were incredibly complex, requiring precise timing across interstellar distances. 30 seconds. Wolf 359 reports ready, Sarah said. Centauri Prime is... Wait, I'm losing their signal. 20 seconds. Another weapon impact, and this time the Lucky Strike's artificial gravity failed momentarily. Jessica felt her stomach lurch as she floated briefly before the systems restored themselves. 10 seconds. Centauri Prime is back online, Sarah reported. Signal weak but stable. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, mark. The quantum computer activated with a sound like reality tearing. The resonance pattern propagated outward from the Lucky Strike at faster-than-light speeds, carried by the same quantum entanglement network that the Devourers had been using to coordinate their attacks. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. The enemy ships continued their assault, their weapons firing with mechanical precision. Then the artifact fragments in the cargo hold began to pulse with erratic light, their steady rhythm breaking into chaotic patterns. It's working, Morrison breathed. The destabilization is propagating through the network. On the tactical display, the Devourer's ships suddenly stopped firing. Their formation broke apart as individual vessels began moving in random directions, no longer coordinated by the network that had made them so effective. Network disruption confirmed, Sarah reported. I'm reading quantum static from all known artifact sites. The links are severing. But their celebration was premature. The largest Devourer ship, a massive vessel that dwarfed their small cargo hauler, began to glow with the same organic light they had seen in the aliens' technology. Instead of being disabled by the network's collapse, it seemed to be growing stronger. It's adapting, Vasquez said in horror. The ship is somehow independent of the network. It's learning from the disruption pattern. The massive ship turned toward the Lucky Strike with predatory intent. Its weapons began to charge, energy readings climbing beyond anything in their database. Zhang, get us out of here, Jessica ordered. FTL drive is offline, the pilot reported. Something in that quantum pulse fried our navigation systems. They were trapped, facing an enemy that seemed to grow more powerful by the moment. The network disruption had worked. Across the galaxy, Devourer forces were losing coordination, becoming vulnerable to human counterattacks. But here, in this system, they faced something that didn't depend on the network for its power. It's the command ship, Morrison realized. the central node that controlled this entire sector. It has its own quantum processing systems, independent of the artifact network. The enemy vessel's weapons reached full charge. Energy readings spiked beyond the Lucky Strike sensor's ability to measure. In seconds, they would be vaporized. Then Zhang's voice crackled over the comm. Hold on to something. I'm going to try something incredibly stupid. The Lucky Strike's engines roared to life, not with their usual controlled burn but with every available erg of power. The ship accelerated directly toward the Devourer command vessel, closing the distance in a matter of seconds. What are you doing? Desica demanded. Ramming speed, Zhang replied grimly. If we can reach their hull before they fire. The plan was insane. The Lucky Strike was a cargo hauler, built for efficiency rather than combat. But sometimes insane plans were the only ones that worked. The distance closed rapidly. The Devourer ship's weapons began to track their approach, trying to target a ship that was moving too fast and too erratically to lock onto. Energy beams lanced past them, missing by meters. Impact in 10 seconds, Zhang announced. Wait, Morrison said suddenly. The quantum computer, it's still active. If we could channel the destabilization pattern directly into their hull, use our ship as a transmission medium. Do it, Desica ordered. Morrison's hands flew over his controls, redirecting the quantum resonance through the Lucky Strike's hull plating. The ship itself became a weapon, carrying a virus designed to disrupt the very foundations of Devourer technology. They struck the alien vessel's hull with tremendous force, the Lucky Strike's reinforced cargo bay punching through the organic armor like a bullet through flesh. For a moment, they were inside the enemy ship, surrounded by writhing corridors that pulsed with alien life. Then the quantum virus activated. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The Devourer ship's hull began to convulse as the destabilization pattern propagated through its biological systems. Corridors collapsed, organic machinery failed, and the vessel's life support systems shut down in cascading failures. Emergency evacuation, Desica ordered. Everyone to the escape pods. They barely made it out before the Lucky Strike exploded, taking the Devourer command ship with it in a brilliant flash of quantum fire. The escape pods scattered like seeds, their tiny engines carrying them away from the expanding debris field. As they floated in the darkness between worlds, watching the wreckage of two civilizations burn, Desica received confirmations from resistance cells across the galaxy. The network disruption had worked. Devourer forces everywhere were losing coordination, becoming vulnerable to human counterattacks for the first time since the war began. It's not over, she said to her team, their faces lit by the glow of burning starships. But it's a beginning. 6 months after the network collapse, Desica stood on the observation deck of Redemption Station, humanity's first major construction project since the end of the war. Through the reinforced windows, she could see the bustle of a civilization rebuilding itself, cargo ships arriving with refugees from reclaimed worlds, construction drones assembling new habitats, and patrol vessels maintaining security around the growing complex. The war was far from over. Scattered Devourer forces still controlled large portions of former Imperial space, and the aliens had proven remarkably adaptable in the absence of their quantum network. But for the first time in almost a year, humanity was winning. The Vega expedition is ready to depart, Marcus reported, joining her at the observation window. He wore the uniform of the reformed Imperial Navy, a loose alliance of survivor fleets that had coalesced around the successful resistance cells. Dr. Morrison thinks we'll find at least 3 more intact artifacts in the ruins there. And Vasquez's research? Progressing ahead of schedule. She's managed to reverse engineer the artifact technology, create weapons that can disrupt Devourer biology without depending on the quantum network. Marcus smiled, the first genuine expression of happiness she'd seen from him in months. We're not just surviving anymore, Desica. We're fighting back. She nodded, but her attention was drawn to a new arrival in the station's docking bays. The ship was unlike anything in the human fleet, sleek and organic, built from technologies that hadn't existed before the war. It was one of the hybrid vessels, constructed using a combination of human engineering and artifact-derived principles. "The future," she said quietly. "What?" "Nothing. Just thinking about how much has changed." She turned away from the window, checking the time display on her wrist computer. "I need to get to the briefing. The Centauri Liberation Fleet is requesting support for their next offensive." As they walked through the station's corridors, Jessica reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The discovery of the artifacts had seemed like salvation, then like a trap, and finally like the key to humanity's survival. The truth, as always, had been more complex than any of them had imagined. The artifacts weren't weapons or beacons, they were something far more profound. They were libraries, containing the accumulated knowledge of dozens of civilizations that had faced the Devourers and fallen. Each one held fragments of technology, philosophy, and strategic knowledge that could be used to fight back against the cosmic predators. But most importantly, they had revealed that humanity wasn't alone in its struggle. Across the galaxy, other species had fought the same war, suffered the same losses, and sometimes found ways to strike back. The quantum network that had once coordinated Devourer attacks was now being used to coordinate the resistance of their prey. "Ma'am," came a voice from behind them. Jessica turned to see a young ensign approaching, his uniform bearing the insignia of the Communications Corps. "Priority message from the Deep Space Monitoring Station. They're detecting organized resistance activity in the Andromeda Galaxy." Andromeda. Another galaxy entirely, where the war against the Devourers had been raging for millennia. If there were survivors there, if there were others who had learned to fight back. "Thank you, Ensign. Forward that data to Admiral Chen's staff." Marcus had been promoted to Admiral when the survivor fleets formed their new command structure. It was a position that suited him. He had always been better at seeing the big picture than focusing on individual battles. As they reached the briefing room, Jessica paused at the entrance. Inside, she could see the faces of humanity's new leadership, scientists, soldiers, and civilians who had survived the worst disaster in human history and emerged determined to rebuild. Some she recognized from the early days of the Resistance. Others were new, representing colonies and fleets that had only recently re-established contact with the growing alliance. "Ready?" Marcus asked. "Always," she replied, and stepped through the door into the future. The briefing room fell silent as she entered, conversation stopping mid-sentence. It still surprised her sometimes, the respect and attention her presence commanded. She had become something of a legend among the survivors, the Marine lieutenant who had led humanity's first successful strike against the Devourers. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, taking her place at the head of the conference table, "let's begin." Outside the station, stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to the small dramas of organic life. But among those stars, on worlds that had once been consumed by darkness, new lights were beginning to shine. Humanity had learned hard lessons about survival, about the price of freedom, and about the importance of hope in the face of impossible odds. The war was far from over. But they were no longer fighting just to survive. They were fighting to win.